What if everything you've ever been taught about connecting with God has been completely backward? For 30 years, Smith Wigglesworth traveled the world, immersing himself in every spiritual tradition, every healing practice, every philosophical system he could find. He sat with monks in monasteries, studied ancient texts, attended countless religious services, and practiced meditation techniques from dozens of different cultures. And yet, the more he searched, the more frustrated he became. Because despite all his efforts, despite all his dedication, something fundamental was missing. The peace he sought remained elusive. The miracles he witnessed in others seemed impossibly distant, and the presence of God felt like trying to grasp smoke with his bare hands. Now here's where Wigglesworth's story takes an extraordinary turn. In 1946, during what he would later describe as his darkest hour, exhausted from decades of spiritual striving, something shifted. Not because he finally found the right technique or discovered the perfect prayer, but because he stopped searching altogether. In that moment of complete surrender, of absolute stillness, a truth so radical revealed itself that it would shatter everything traditional religion had taught him. Has this ever happened to you? Have you ever felt like you're doing everything right spiritually, yet somehow missing the very thing you're seeking? But before we begin, please hit the like button and let me know where in the world you're watching from today. It's always fascinating seeing who's joining us from around the world. And if you haven't already, make sure to hit that subscribe button and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any of our future videos. What Wigglesworth discovered wasn't a new religion or a complex spiritual practice requiring years of dedication. It wasn't about becoming more worthy, more holy, or more spiritually advanced. Instead, he uncovered something that had been hiding in plain sight all along, something so simple that most people miss it entirely because they're looking too far away, too high up, too outside of themselves. The divine presence he'd been desperately seeking across continents and throughout countless sacred texts wasn't distant at all. It wasn't waiting in some heavenly realm, judging whether he was good enough or praying hard enough. The revelation that came to him challenged the very foundation of how humanity has approached spirituality for millennia. We've been taught to reach upward, to plead, to prove ourselves worthy of God's attention and grace. We pray as beggars, hoping that if we say the right words or perform the right rituals, something external will finally respond to our desperate calls. But Wigglesworth realized that this entire approach is fundamentally flawed. Stay with me until the end, because what you're about to discover might completely transform not just your spiritual practice, but your entire relationship with healing, abundance, and the nature of reality itself. This wasn't just a theoretical understanding or a pleasant philosophical insight. The truth Wigglesworth uncovered had immediate, tangible effects. People with terminal illnesses found themselves suddenly healed. Those trapped in decades of depression discovered causeless joy emerging from within. Financial situations that seemed hopeless resolved themselves naturally. And the remarkable thing was that none of this required tremendous effort or years of spiritual discipline. What you're about to discover might surprise you, because the key to everything Wigglesworth found has nothing to do with reaching for something you don't have, and everything to do with recognizing what you've never been without. So what exactly did Smith Wigglesworth uncover in that moment of silence? What is this backward approach to God that humanity has been missing for centuries? And more importantly, how can understanding this truth transform your own life in ways that seem impossible right now? The answer begins with understanding where we've been looking. The year was 1946, and Smith Wigglesworth found himself at a breaking point. After 3 decades of searching, studying, and practicing every spiritual path imaginable, he felt further from truth than ever before. This wasn't just frustration or disappointment. It was a full-blown crisis of faith that shook him to his core. Everything he'd been taught in traditional Christianity, all the doctrines he'd memorized, all the prayers he'd faithfully recited suddenly felt hollow, like following a map to a destination that didn't exist. The weight of this realization was crushing. Had he wasted 30 years chasing an illusion? Was there any truth to be found at all? But sometimes the greatest revelations emerge from our deepest despair. In that moment of complete spiritual exhaustion, when Wigglesworth finally stopped trying to reach God, stopped performing, spiritual practices, stopped doing anything at all. Something extraordinary happened. The silence he fell into wasn't empty. It was full, alive, vibrating with a presence he'd been seeking his entire life. And in that silence came a truth so radical, so completely different from everything religion had taught him, that it would transform not just his own life, but the lives of countless others who would later discover what he uncovered. The hidden truth Winggleworth discovered wasn't about a god sitting on a throne somewhere in the clouds, judging humanity and occasionally granting favors to those who prayed correctly. That entire framework, he realized, was the source of humanity's spiritual confusion. We've been treating God like a powerful person who lives somewhere else, someone we need to impress or convince to help us. We approach prayer like making a phone call to a distant relative, hoping they'll pick up and grant our requests. The impact of this misunderstanding on human spirituality has been profound and devastating. It's kept millions of sincere seekers trapped in cycles of spiritual striving, always reaching for something that seems perpetually out of reach. What Winggleworth recognized in that transformative moment was that God isn't separate from you at all. God isn't a being you contact. God is the very consciousness through which you're reading these words right now. The awareness that's observing your thoughts, the presence that's experiencing your life. That's what God actually is. Not a distant deity, but your own consciousness when it's free from the illusion that you're separate from the divine. This wasn't just philosophy for Winggleworth. This was a practical foundation that would revolutionize his entire approach to healing, relationships, abundance, and every other aspect of human experience. If this content is speaking to something real in you, go ahead and subscribe to the channel. This is where we dive deep into spiritual truths that actually transform lives, not just surface-level inspiration that fades by tomorrow. You'll want to be here for what's coming next. Think about this carefully. Every time you've experienced genuine peace, every moment of unconditional love you've felt, every instance of sudden clarity or knowing that transcended logic, you weren't making contact with something external. You were experiencing your true nature without the interference of conditioned thinking. Behind the scenes of your everyday thoughts and worries, beneath the surface of your personality and life story, there's an awareness that's always been present, always been whole, always been divine. The journey Winggleworth embarked on wasn't about finding this presence. It was about removing the mental habits that obscured what had always been there. Now I want to go even deeper into this revelation, because understanding this truth intellectually is one thing, but experiencing it as your living reality is something entirely different. The transformation that happens when this recognition shifts from concept to direct experience changes everything about how you move through the world. Your decisions no longer come from fear or lack. Your relationships stop being transactions where you're trying to get something from others. Health issues that seemed permanent begin to dissolve naturally. Financial struggles resolve themselves without the desperate striving that actually blocks abundance from flowing. This isn't magical thinking or wishful hoping. It's what naturally occurs when you stop living from the illusion of separation and start expressing from your true nature. Write in the comments, "I'm ready to see this truth," if this resonates with where you are on your spiritual journey right now. Winggleworth had a specific name for this divine presence that lives within every human being. He called it the Christ within. Not Christ as a historical figure or religious icon, but Christ as the universal divine identity that exists at the core of every person's consciousness. This is what makes his teaching so revolutionary and, frankly, so challenging for traditional religious mindsets to accept. Because if the divine presence isn't somewhere else waiting to be reached, if it's actually the deepest truth of what you are right now, then the entire framework of spiritual seeking collapses. You're not a flawed human trying to become spiritual. Your spiritual consciousness temporarily, believing you're merely human. The implications of this recognition are staggering when you really let them sink in. Every moment of genuine peace you've ever experienced, every instance of love that flowed through you without reason or condition, every flash of insight or knowing that seemed to come from beyond your logical mind, these weren't gifts from something external. They were glimpses of your true nature breaking through the conditioned patterns of fear-based thinking, the mental habits that tell you you're not enough, that you need to acquire something or become someone different, that happiness depends on external circumstances changing. These thoughts create a veil that obscures what you actually are beneath them. Now here's where Wigglesworth's approach becomes intensely practical rather than merely philosophical. When this recognition of your divine identity shifts from intellectual concept to lived experience, your entire relationship with problems transforms. Issues that seemed solid and permanent begin dissolving naturally because you're no longer creating them from a consciousness of separation and lack. Think about how most people approach challenges. They see themselves as a limited person, facing an obstacle that needs to be overcome through effort, strategy, or getting something they don't currently have. This mindset actually reinforces the problem by continually affirming the reality of limitation. But when you recognize yourself as the Christ, within as divine consciousness expressing through your individual experience, problems lose their power over you. Not because you're denying them or pretending they don't exist, but because you're seeing them from a completely different vantage point. It's like the difference between being lost in a maze versus viewing that same maze from above. The complexity that seemed overwhelming from ground level becomes simple and navigable when perspective shifts. This is what Wigglesworth meant when he said that problems dissolve naturally rather than being solved through effort. The transformation in mindset here is crucial to understand. Wigglesworth developed a specific practice he called practicing the presence that differs radically from conventional meditation or prayer. Most spiritual practices treat spirituality as something you do for a certain period of time. You meditate for 20 minutes, you pray before meals, you attend religious services on weekends. The rest of the time, you're just living ordinary life as an ordinary person. Wigglesworth saw this compartmentalization as the fundamental mistake that keeps people trapped in cycles of seeking without finding. His approach involves a complete reversal of perspective that affects every single moment of your day. Instead of being a human who occasionally has spiritual experiences during designated practice times, you begin recognizing yourself as spiritual consciousness that's having a human experience. This isn't just semantic wordplay. It's a fundamental shift in identity that changes everything about how you perceive reality and interact with life's circumstances. Your decisions start flowing from a different source. The impact on your relationships, your health, your financial situation, your emotional well-being, all of it transforms because the foundation from which you're operating has completely changed. Behind the scenes of what appears to be ordinary daily life, there's always been this divine presence expressing itself through you. The revelation Wigglesworth offers isn't about adding something new to your life or achieving some advanced spiritual state. It's about recognizing what's already been true all along and learning to live from that recognition rather than from the conditioned beliefs that obscure it. When this practice becomes natural, when seeing yourself as spiritual consciousness becomes more automatic than the old habit of identifying as a limited person, that's when the real miracles begin manifesting as normal, everyday occurrences. Write in the comments, "I am consciousness," if you're beginning to see yourself differently through this teaching. What makes Wigglesworth's approach so different from traditional spiritual practices is that it doesn't confine spirituality to designated times or special places. Most people treat their spiritual life like a hobby they engage in for brief periods. They wake up, meditate for 15 minutes, then spend the rest of their day operating from the same old patterns of thinking and reacting. They might pray before meals or attend a weekend service, but Monday through Friday, they're back to being the same worried, stressed, limited person they've always been. This compartmentalization is exactly what keeps transformation from taking root in any meaningful way. The practice Wigglesworth taught becomes the very foundation from which you live every single moment. It's not something you do and then stop doing. It's a continuous awareness that gradually becomes more natural than the unconscious patterns that used to run your life automatically. Through this sustained recognition, something remarkable begins happening in your perception. You start seeing through the surface appearances of discord, conflict, and problems to the underlying harmony that's always been present. That difficult coworker who triggers your frustration, you begin perceiving the divine consciousness expressing through them, even when their behavior seems anything but divine. That financial pressure that's been keeping you awake at night, You start recognizing it as an invitation to go deeper into truth, rather than as evidence of your lack. This shift in perception isn't about positive thinking or trying to see the silver lining in every cloud. It's something far more profound. You're learning to distinguish between what's actually real at the spiritual level and what's merely an appearance created by conditioned thinking. Every challenge that shows up in your life becomes an opportunity to practice this deeper seeing, to look past the surface drama to the spiritual reality underneath. The more you practice this, the more natural it becomes, until eventually you're seeing from truth more often than you're seeing from illusion. It becomes more automatic than breathing itself. Behind the scenes of what appears to be struggle and limitation, there's always been perfect harmony expressing itself. The journey Wigglesworth guides people on isn't about creating this harmony through effort or spiritual techniques. It's about removing the mental filters that prevent you from seeing what's already true. And here's where his teaching reaches its most revolutionary peak, the point where it completely diverges from everything traditional religion has taught about the relationship between humanity and divinity. There's a statement in Scripture that says, "I and the Father are one." Most religious traditions interpret this as something unique to Jesus, a claim of special divine status that separates him from ordinary humanity. Wigglesworth understood this statement as the fundamental truth of every human being, not just one person who lived 2,000 years ago. The moment this recognition becomes your living reality, everything about your spiritual practice transforms. You're no longer a person who needs healing, who needs fixing, who needs God to intervene and help you. You become the very presence that does the healing. The transformation here is complete and total. You shift from seeking something from God to recognizing yourself as God's presence expressing through your individual consciousness. The impact of this identity shift on practical daily life cannot be overstated. Your decisions start flowing from divine wisdom rather than fear-based calculation. Your health responds to being seen and treated as the expression of perfect spiritual being rather than a vulnerable, material body that can break down. Your relationships transform because you're no longer trying to get love, validation, or security from others. You're expressing love from the fullness of what you are. Financial abundance begins flowing naturally because you've stopped operating from a consciousness of lack trying to attract something you believe you don't have. This isn't about becoming arrogant or thinking you're better than others. It's about recognizing the same truth that exists in every person, whether they're currently aware of it or not. Every human being is divine consciousness expressing individually. Some know this truth, most don't. But the truth remains unchanged by belief or awareness. What changes is your experience of life when you align with this truth versus when you operate from the illusion of separation. Put in the comments, "I am the presence," if this revelation is shifting how you see yourself. Now here's what most people find surprising about Wigglesworth's approach. You might expect that achieving this profound recognition of your divine identity would require years of disciplined practice, complex meditation techniques, or tremendous spiritual effort. But the truth is actually the opposite. The realization happens through what Wigglesworth called resting in the silence of being. Not doing something, but stopping the doing. Not adding more spiritual techniques to your routine, but releasing the mental grip that's been blocking truth from revealing itself all along. This silence Wigglesworth speaks of isn't just the absence of external noise. It's the quieting of the mind's constant attempt to fix, change, improve, or control your circumstances. Think about how most of us approach problems. Our thoughts immediately jump into action mode. We analyze, strategize, worry, plan, and try to force solutions through sheer mental effort. This constant mental activity creates a kind of static that drowns out the deeper wisdom available. When the mind becomes still, when thoughts finally release their grip on outcomes, when you stop trying to make something happen or prevent something from happening, that's when truth reveals itself naturally and spontaneously. The impact of this understanding becomes clear when you see how Wigglesworth actually worked with people who came to him for healing. There was a woman who came to him with terminal cancer. The doctors had done everything modern medicine could offer. They'd exhausted every treatment option, and their final verdict was unequivocal. Her condition was incurable, and she had very little time left. She was desperate, grasping at any possibility of hope, when someone told her about Winggleworth and his unusual approach to healing. What happened next defies everything conventional thinking tells us about how healing should work. Winggleworth didn't try to treat her condition. He didn't perform some elaborate healing ritual or use special prayers directed at her cancer. He didn't even focus on the disease at all. Instead, he simply sat with her in that profound silence of being. Not the silence of two people who have nothing to say to each other, but the silence where divine presence becomes palpable, where the illusion of separation begins dissolving in the recognition of what's actually true beneath appearances. The transformation that occurred wasn't gradual or uncertain. Within weeks, this woman, who had been given a death sentence by medical experts, found every trace of cancer completely gone from her body. The doctors who had declared her case hopeless were baffled. They used words like medically impossible and spontaneous remission because they had no framework to explain what happened. But Winggleworth understood it perfectly. This wasn't a miracle in the sense of divine intervention overriding natural law. It was spiritually inevitable once the fundamental illusion of separation dissolved. Behind the scenes of what appeared to be a physical healing was something far more profound happening. The woman had stopped being someone with terminal cancer who needed healing from an external source. In that silence, her true spiritual identity was recognized and experienced directly, not as a concept or belief, but as living reality. When consciousness recognizes its true nature as divine, whole, and complete, physical conditions that arose from a consciousness of separation and limitation naturally dissolve. The body simply aligns with the truth being recognized in consciousness. This wasn't an isolated incident in Winggleworth's work. Time and again, he witnessed transformations that medical science deemed impossible, financial situations resolving that seemed hopelessly stuck, relationships healing that appeared permanently broken. The common thread wasn't technique or effort. It was this resting in silence where truth reveals what it has always been, beneath the appearances that conditioned thinking creates and maintains. Type in the comments. Truth reveals itself, if you're beginning to understand how healing actually works at this deeper level. Margaret's story illustrates how this recognition can happen in the most unexpected moments, during the most ordinary activities. She'd been living with chronic pain for 15 years. 15 years of doctor visits, specialists, pain management clinics, alternative therapies, energy healing sessions, acupuncture, medication trials. You name it, she tried it. Nothing provided more than temporary relief, and even that was rare. The pain had become her identity, the constant companion that colored every decision, limited every activity, and dominated her entire existence. What happened to Margaret reveals the hidden truth behind all genuine transformation. Her breakthrough didn't come during a formal meditation session or a healing appointment. It came on an ordinary Tuesday morning while she was washing dishes at her kitchen sink. Her hands were in soapy water, her mind wandering through familiar territory, the usual thoughts about her pain and limitations. And then something shifted without warning or effort. She suddenly realized she'd been seeking healing as Margaret, the suffering person. She'd been trying to fix Margaret, improve Margaret's condition, get relief for Margaret's pain. In that moment at the kitchen sink, something extraordinary occurred that completely changed her entire experience of reality. The identity of Margaret, the person with chronic pain, simply disappeared from her awareness. It wasn't suppressed or denied. It just wasn't there anymore. What remained was pure awareness itself. Consciousness without a story, without a painful past, without an identity built around suffering. And in that pure awareness there was no pain, not because the pain was being ignored or transcended, but because the person who had been in pain had temporarily ceased to exist as a separate identity. The transformation didn't stop there. Within 3 months, chronic pain that had dominated 15 years of her life was completely gone. But the real miracle wasn't just the physical healing. Margaret discovered she was living from an entirely different foundation. The fear-based thinking that had run her life for decades had lost its grip on her consciousness. Life became an adventure rather than something to endure, and decisions flowed from a place of possibility rather than limitation. Robert's journey shows how These same principles apply to financial situations that seem hopeless. After 20 years of building his business, he was facing complete financial ruin. Bankruptcy papers were being prepared, creditors were calling constantly, and the crushing weight of financial pressure was destroying his marriage. He'd tried everything the self-help industry recommends: positive thinking, visualization, manifestation techniques, affirmations. None of it worked. And frankly, it only made him feel more frustrated and hopeless because he was failing at spiritual practices on top of failing financially. What Winggleworth taught Robert was radically different from typical prosperity teachings. The transformation in mindset here was crucial. Instead of trying to attract abundance from some external source, instead of visualizing money coming to him or affirming prosperity while feeling desperate inside, Robert learned to recognize the abundance that was already present in his consciousness as his spiritual birthright. Not something he needed to get, but something he inherently was. The impact on his business and life was dramatic. Robert stopped seeing himself as lacking and needing to acquire prosperity from outside himself. As he began living from this recognition of inherent wholeness rather than trying to manifest acquired prosperity, opportunities appeared naturally without force or struggle. His consciousness shifted from scarcity to abundance at the foundational level. Within 6 months, not only was his business thriving beyond his previous success, but his marriage had healed because he was no longer operating from fear and desperation. He was expressing from fullness rather than grasping from emptiness, and life responded accordingly to that fundamental shift in being. Write in the comments, "I am whole," if you're ready to shift from seeking to recognizing what you already are. Sarah's experience reveals something profound about conditions we typically label as mental or emotional disorders. She'd been battling severe depression for most of her adult life. Years of therapy, multiple medications that provided some relief but never addressed the underlying emptiness, support groups, self-help programs, meditation apps. Some interventions gave her temporary uplift, but nothing created the lasting transformation she desperately needed. The depression always returned, that heavy darkness that made even simple daily tasks feel impossible. Through Winggleworth's teaching, Sarah discovered something that completely reframed her understanding of what depression actually was. It wasn't a chemical imbalance that needed correcting through medication, though medication had its place in managing symptoms. It wasn't a character flaw or weakness requiring therapy to fix, though therapy provided helpful tools. The hidden truth beneath all these surface treatments was that depression was the natural result of consciousness believing itself separate from its source, cut off from the love and wholeness that is its true nature. Think about what that means for a moment. Depression isn't just random brain chemistry gone wrong. At its deepest level, it's the experience of consciousness that has forgotten what it actually is, believing itself to be a separate, isolated, limited individual, disconnected from the infinite source of love, joy, and wholeness. When you believe at the core of your being that you're fundamentally alone and separate, depression becomes the inevitable emotional expression of that belief. Not because something is wrong with you, but because you're experiencing the natural consequence of believing an illusion. When this fundamental belief in separation dissolved for Sarah through recognition of her true spiritual identity, depression couldn't maintain itself anymore. It's not that she fought against it or used willpower to overcome it. The shift happened gradually over several weeks as she began experiencing moments of causeless joy, deep peace that had no external reason or trigger. These moments had nothing to do with her circumstances improving or good things happening. They arose spontaneously from within, independent of anything outside herself. The transformation deepened until these moments expanded and became her natural state, rather than temporary experiences. The person who had been depressed for decades simply was no longer there, in the same way. A new foundation for living had been established that was unshakable by external circumstances. Behind the scenes of what appeared to be psychological healing was something far more fundamental: the dissolution of the primary illusion that creates all suffering. Now, understanding how Winggleworth actually worked with people reveals the practical application of these principles. He developed what he called spiritual treatment, but this term is misleading if you think of treatment in conventional ways. This isn't about sending positive thoughts, healing energy, or prayers directed at fixing someone's problem. It's not about visualization, affirmation, or any technique designed to change conditions from their current state to a desired state. Spiritual treatment, as Winggleworth practiced it, involves recognizing spiritual truth in a way that dissolves the illusion, creating the appearance of the problem in the first place. When someone would call asking for help with a health challenge, financial crisis, or relationship conflict, Winggleworth didn't try to heal the condition or solve the problem. Instead, he rested in the recognition that in spiritual truth, there is no person with a condition. There is only perfect spiritual being expressing itself. The practitioner becomes transparent for truth, rather than a helper trying to fix another person's problem. This complete shift in identity from helper to transparency for divine consciousness is what makes this approach so remarkably effective and permanent. The practitioner isn't sending anything to anyone. They're simply recognizing what's already true beneath appearances, and consciousness responds to that recognition because truth has inherent power that illusion lacks. The impact on physical reality is immediate and tangible precisely because what we call physical reality is actually consciousness expressing in form. Put in the comments, I recognize the truth, if this understanding of how healing really works is beginning to click for you. One of Winggleworth's most powerful and transformative practices was what he called the art of dying daily. Now, this isn't about physical death or some morbid spiritual concept. It's about the daily dying of the personal sense of self that believes it's separate from God, from good, from the wholeness that is its true nature. Every single day, multiple times throughout the day, you'll catch yourself thinking as a person who lacks something, needs something, or fears something. These thoughts are automatic conditioned patterns that have been running for years or decades. And each time you catch one of these thoughts, you have an opportunity to let that personal sense die in that moment. The transformation happens when instead of identifying with, I need more money, or I'm afraid of getting sick, or I lack the relationship I want, you recognize yourself as the very presence of completeness expressing itself as your individual experience of life. This dying to the personal sense isn't a one-time event. It's a continuous practice that becomes so natural and automatic over time that you begin living from spiritual identity rather than human identity without constant effort or remembering. From this foundation, what humans call miracles become normal, natural expressions of what you actually are. The journey Winggleworth guides people on leads to what he called the mystical life. And this is where everything we've been discussing comes together in practical, everyday living. The mystical life isn't about retreating from the world, becoming some ethereal spiritual being who floats above human concerns. It's about living in constant conscious communion with the divine presence that you are, right in the middle of ordinary daily activities. Prayer transforms from periodic requests for help into an ongoing recognition of truth that happens naturally throughout your day. Every moment becomes an opportunity to witness infinite love expressing itself through your experience and through everyone around you. Behind the scenes of what appears to be ordinary life, there's this continuous flow of divine creativity, intelligence, and love manifesting in countless ways. Work stops being something you do to earn money and becomes worship, a sacred expression of your divine nature. Your job, whatever it is, becomes an opportunity to bring consciousness, creativity, and love into form. Relationships transform into holy encounters, where you're recognizing the divine in others and allowing your own divine nature to express through connection. Even the most mundane activities, washing dishes, driving to work, paying bills, all of these become expressions of divine creativity when you're living from your true spiritual identity. The revelation here is that the mystical life isn't separate from ordinary human life. It's not an escape from daily responsibilities into some special spiritual realm. It's ordinary human life lived from the foundation of truth, rather than the foundation of illusion. Nothing in your external circumstances needs to change for you to begin living this way. The shift happens in the recognition of what you are, and that recognition transforms how you perceive and experience everything. The impact of living this mystical life touches every aspect of your existence. Your decisions flow from wisdom, rather than fear. Your health naturally aligns with the wholeness you're recognizing yourself to be. Financial abundance expresses as a natural result of consciousness that knows itself as inherently complete. Relationships deepen because you're no longer seeking something from others, but sharing from the fullness of what you are. The mindset shift from seeking to being, from trying to become spiritual to recognizing you already are spiritual consciousness. This is what makes everything different. What Winggleworth discovered and taught isn't a path that takes years to bear fruit. The moment you begin recognizing your true nature, life begins responding to that recognition. Some changes happen immediately, others unfold gradually, but all of them flow naturally from this fundamental shift in identity. You're not adding something new to your life or achieving some advanced state. You're removing the beliefs that have been obscuring what's always been true. Write in the comments, "I am living from truth," if you're ready to embrace this mystical life in your everyday experience. If you've made it all the way to this point, I want to thank you for taking this journey with me through Smith Wigglesworth's profound discoveries. The fact that you're still here tells me something important about where you are in your own spiritual path. You're not just casually browsing content. You're genuinely seeking truth, and that seeking itself is what opens the door to recognition. This channel exists to share these transformative teachings with people who are ready to hear them, who are tired of surface-level spirituality and want the real substance that actually changes lives. If that's you, and I think it is since you're still watching, then subscribing ensures you won't miss the deeper insights we explore in future videos. Each one is designed to take you further into this recognition of your true nature, to give you practical ways to live from spiritual identity in your everyday life. Go ahead and hit that like button if this message resonated with something true inside you. It helps this content reach others who are on the same journey, looking for the same answers you've been seeking. And here's what I'd love to know. Leave a comment saying, "This is my path," so I can see who's really connecting with this teaching. It creates a community of people who are walking this mystical path together, supporting each other's recognition of truth. There's a video right here that goes even deeper into how to apply these principles in specific life situations, the practical steps for dying to the personal sense and living from divine consciousness. Click and continue with me over there, because what we've covered today is just the beginning of understanding how profound Wigglesworth's discoveries really are.